Good morning, Bitcoins. This is MadBitcoins live. And we're joined by Roger Ver, the founder of MemoryDealers.com, an early adopter and early acceptor of Bitcoin, an investor in many Bitcoin companies, too numerous to mention, owner of Bitcoin.com, nicknamed Bitcoin Jesus for his ever-wavering commitment to evangelizing Bitcoin to everyone, anywhere. Roger, thank you so much for being on the show.
Always fun to be on the show.
Well, I'd like to, how are you doing? Are you doing all right there? Things good?
Yeah, things are great in my personal life, and things are good with Bitcoin. But things can be even better with Bitcoin, and that's why I'm working every day on. I'm sure people are a little bit tired about hearing about the scaling debate, but it's really, really important for the future of Bitcoin. So I'm really hard at work on that every day. So.
All right. Well, first, let's start by trying to understand the problem. Now, I've talked to Tone Vase, and Tone talked to you, and at one point, you had him completely convinced on this problem. The basic problem that I was described is you have a Bitcoin address, let's say a public address, like my donation address, and I get many transactions, many random little small bits of Bitcoin, a couple dollars here and there. And when I had to combine them together to send them to a different wallet, I had to pay a lot of transaction fees. Now, for me, it was like $300 and I paid a $10 fee. But certainly for a company like yourself, Memory Dealers, or a larger Bitcoin institution, these fees could get out of control really quickly. Is that the basic problem, that the fees are too high, especially when you have to combine transactions?
So fees are too high, but the fees being too high are a symptom of another problem, and that's a symptom of the blocks being congested and the blocks being full up all the time, which leads to Bitcoin transactions taking hours or even days to confirm. Just last week, the average confirmation time for a Bitcoin transaction was 2 hours. And that's very, very different than the average confirmation time of about 10 minutes that Bitcoin had for about the first 7.5 years of its existence. So suddenly the confirmation time going from 10 minutes to hours and hours, and the fees going from around a penny to dollars or even tens of dollars, that's a big, big, big problem for the adoption of Bitcoin. And we're seeing merchants and merchant service providers like BitPay and Coinbase starting to pass along those fees directly to their customers. And if people have the option of using something that's slow and expensive, or 1,001 altcoins, or even centralized other payment networks that are cheaper and faster, people are going to be less likely to use Bitcoin. And that's really, really sad thing for Bitcoin, and sad thing for the world, and really, really frustrating thing. So I'm doing my best to solve that issue. And the part that really scares me is I hear many of the core developers openly saying that full blocks and high fees are a good thing for Bitcoin. Full blocks and high fees are rat poison for the adoption of Bitcoin. They will drive people to use something other than Bitcoin. So anybody who thinks that high fees and slow confirmations and full blocks are a good thing for Bitcoin, they're plain and simple wrong, and they don't understand the things that make Bitcoin useful as money. And people talk about, oh, well, Bitcoin's a store of value. The only reason people want to save money is so that they can spend it later. And if Bitcoin becomes not usable as a means of exchange, people won't want to save their wealth in it either. So I'm really, really concerned about the future of Bitcoin on both fronts, as a medium of exchange and as a store of value. If Bitcoin can't be used as a medium of exchange, it won't be used as a store of value either.
So this is about more than just buying coffee. You're saying that the blocks are full, there's transactions that are waiting, they take hours and hours to come through. This causes customer support problems for certainly your company and BitPay, other companies like that. You're absolutely correct. Coinbase did announce a few days ago that they're going to pass on the fees to the consumer, whereas previously the fees were so low, they were covering them. So we have seen major shifts and major changes. I do think if the transactions blocks are full, well, either Bitcoin's popular or there's a lot of spam. Right, and so it's kind of a good thing, but you're saying that long term that would kill us, right?
Yeah, so it's a great thing that we're having this problem, in the sense that now so many people want to use Bitcoin that we're arguing over how we make room for these new people to use Bitcoin. That's a much better problem to have than a problem of nobody's using Bitcoin, so it has no value because nobody's using it. So of those two problems, this is the wonderful one of the two to have. But it's still a problem that we want to solve. So Bitcoin isn't the only cryptocurrency in the world. It's not the only payment mechanism in the world. It's not the only form of money in the world. So we need to make Bitcoin the absolute best form of money we possibly can. And making the fees be high and the confirmations be slow and the double spend risk be high, that's the exact opposite of what we need to be doing with Bitcoin. We need to make Bitcoin as useful to as many people around the world as we possibly can. And I hear a lot of Blockstream and Core supporters openly saying that the high fees and full blocks are a good thing, and it's not. It will destroy Bitcoin in the long run, and will give all of Bitcoin's competitors an advantage over Bitcoin, and people will start using things other than Bitcoin if the fees stay high and the confirmation times stay long. Like, that's a really, really big problem for Bitcoin, and it's really frustrating that people are openly saying that those things that are damaging to Bitcoin are good for Bitcoin. It's wrong, and it's terrifying for the future of Bitcoin.
Now, part of the reason I asked you here tonight is I wanted to try to set to rest some of these conspiracy theories that I'm hearing. So one of the first ones that I've heard is...
I'm not a lizard person. No.
Not a lizard person. All right. Now, I was going to ask, but I'll add that to the list. But I just was wondering, I've heard that the miners are not mining full blocks. I've heard that some of the miners are mining empty blocks, and that they might be doing this to cause the transaction backlog that you're talking about. What would you say about this? Have you heard any of these accusations before?
That's a complete myth. So what's actually going on, and I have a lot of experience in this now because I've been running a mining pool for a number of months. When a new block is found on the network, it takes a couple of moments for it to propagate across the world to all these different mining nodes. And then once the node receives it, it takes it a few more seconds to actually validate that block and make sure that everything is as it should be within that. So during that time, let's call it 5 to 15 seconds, depending on the block and the network speeds and that sort of thing. What the miners are doing is they're mining on just the header of that block, which means they haven't finished validating the block, and they're just taking for granted that this is going to be the next block, but they haven't finished checking it themselves. But during that time, they don't know what the content of that block is, so they can't build the whole new block, so they just mine an empty block during that time. So almost all of these empty blocks that you see, you'll notice that they were mined just a few seconds after the block before that. And so what's going on is the only option the pools have, or the miners have, is either they can mine an empty block during that time period when the block is propagating and being validated, or they don't mine at all. So as a miner, it's very, very clear. It'd be better to mine an empty block and get the 12.5 Bitcoins from that than to not mine at all during that period and have no chance of getting a block. So most of the empty blocks that you see happening are because of that, and it's just fine. And it's actually a nice way of slowing the network down from getting ahead of itself. If the blocks are too big and they're propagating around and it's taking too long for people to get a whole copy of them, the fact that a pool is mining an empty block, it lets the rest of the network catch back up, because the empty block propagates very quickly and can be validated very quickly. So it lets the whole Bitcoin network catch back up to where things are supposed to be. So it's actually kind of a nice safety valve for slowing down the speed of the transaction rate on the Bitcoin network when needed.
All right. Now, you mentioned if the blocks are too big. Now, the current block size is 1 megabyte. We want to raise to 2 megabytes with Bitcoin Unlimited. Now, I've heard things about the Great Firewall of China. And I've heard concerns that the Chinese miners will be unable to mine larger blocks. I don't know if it's at 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, but at some point there'll be some kind of a latency issue where they just can't keep up because of this unfortunate government firewall, which I'm sure we're both kind of against. But have you heard about this? Like, is this a problem? Like, are the Chinese miners, would they be boxed out if the block size raises too high?
So I'd like to take one step back, and you said that Bitcoin Unlimited is an attempt to raise the block size to 2 megabytes, and that's not actually what it's an attempt to do. What it's an attempt to do is change the way in which the block size is set. So right now the block size is set by a couple of dozen core developers who've decided the maximum block size is 1 megabyte because maybe 2 dozen people decided so. What Bitcoin Unlimited does is it allows everybody who's running a node to decide what the maximum block size they're willing to accept is. And the idea is that the Bitcoin network as a whole will converge upon a particular maximum block size, whether it's 1 megabyte or 2 megabytes or 20 megabytes, we don't know, but everybody will now be able to decide rather than just 2 dozen people deciding on behalf of everybody else and hard coding that into the code.
Okay, so it would be the nodes, not the miners. So like a node is someone that runs it so you can confirm transactions, and businesses sometimes run these to make their transactions go faster. It's a necessity if you're sending a lot of transactions. Would anyone just be able to run a node? Would there be a threat that, I mean, we're talking about a democracy issue here. Like, would there be a mob of new nodes that would suddenly pop up? Would that be a problem?
Well, anybody can run a node. You can run a node right now today on a Raspberry Pi on your home internet connection, and you won't have a hard time doing that. But also, all the mining pool operators are running nodes as well, and those are the ones that actually secure the network and validate the blocks and do that. So you kind of, there's no simple answer. You can't say it's just these nodes or it's just those nodes. It's kind of everybody and the commerce that's happening on Bitcoin as well. It's the whole system as a whole. And that's probably why this whole debate hasn't been settled already, because there's not any one specific place you can point to and say, oh, this is who's in charge of solving this issue.
So
But in regards,
the current vote is the miners, right? The miners are voting on BU or they're voting on SegWit. What you're saying is you want to expand the pool, have everyone that's running a node, which includes miners and commerce people and people that are just into Bitcoin. So more people would be able to vote.
well, right now it's hard coded into the software code that's produced by the people
Right.
that are part of Bitcoin Core, which isn't any more core to Bitcoin than anything else. It's just a fantastic marketing name that they have there. Um, what Bitcoin Unlimited does is it just allows people to configure their own nodes to specify what the maximum block size they on their own node are willing to accept. And if they set a size that's too small or too big, they're risk from not participating with the main Bitcoin chain. So as we're seeing from this current scaling debate, there's a huge motivation for everybody to stay on the same chain and be part of the same Bitcoin network. Otherwise, we probably would have already fractured into 1,000 pieces. So even once the users are able to configure this themselves, I think 99.9% of people are still going to stay on the same chain because you want to be using the same form of money that everybody else is using. If you're the only person in the world using your form of money, if you're using mad Bitcoin bucks and you're the only one in the entire world using it, they're not very useful. And that's what makes Bitcoin so incredibly useful already is we have tens of millions of people around the world that are using Bitcoin. That makes it an incredibly powerful network, and that network effect is an incredibly powerful magnet to keep people with Bitcoin and not move to some other altcoin. But if the fees get too high with Bitcoin and the transaction confirmation times get too long and the double spins get too easy, people will migrate to other things. And we're already seeing that. Bitcoin has the lowest percentage of the overall market cap of cryptocurrencies ever before. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, the ETF was declined, so a lot of people that were holding Bitcoin up until that point, hoping that it would go to the moon because of that, have now diversified either out of Bitcoin back into fiat or more likely into other altcoins. That's why we've seen this giant altcoin run up because, to be honest, the user experience for a lot of altcoins today are much better than Bitcoin. And what Bitcoin does still have going for it is that huge network effect, but that's not insurmountable. And I'm very afraid for the future of Bitcoin. If that network effect that Bitcoin has is surpassed by something else, that's really bad news for Bitcoin.
I would definitely say some of the altcoin pumps are money exiting Bitcoin and perhaps smartly. We've seen things like Dash and Ethereum and Monero go up, but we've also seen pumps in dead projects like Namecoin and Feathercoin, variety of just random pumps. It just might be new money moving through the markets. I'm not sure how smart that new money is. Things like Namecoin, and no disrespect to Namecoin or Feathercoin, they're interesting projects, but they haven't really been updated in years, and they did see 150% pumps. So it is really interesting. I think I interrupted you earlier about the Chinese miners, about the Great Firewall. Did you want to expand more on that?
Yeah, so the developers of Bitcoin Unlimited came up with an amazing technology called extreme thin blocks. And basically what that allows people to do is to propagate their blocks in a much more efficient manner. In fact, it's so efficient that now using this technology that was developed by the Bitcoin Unlimited developers, you can now transmit a block from a node outside of the Great Firewall of China to a node inside of the Great Firewall of China. You can now propagate that block faster than you could previously with the old Bitcoin Core technology. You can do that faster across the Great Firewall of China now than you could from one node to another node previously, not crossing the Great Firewall of China. So that's a huge improvement to block propagation. So even blocks today, much bigger than a megabyte are no problem at all using this great technology that was created by the Bitcoin Unlimited devs. They're a bunch of smart guys over there. And that's not to say that there's not a bunch of smart guys at Bitcoin Core, but the guys at Bitcoin Unlimited understand the characteristics that make Bitcoin useful as money much better than the people at Bitcoin Core. The people at Bitcoin Core are openly calling for high fees and full blocks. That's damaging to the Bitcoin's usefulness as money. And that's a really scary thing for me when I hear people that are advocating for Bitcoin's usability as money to be undermined by high fees, slow confirmation times that are caused by these full blocks. That's bad news for Bitcoin, and that's why I support Bitcoin Unlimited. And I appreciate and thank a lot of the core devs for the work that they've done. They're smart people, but they're completely wrong when they say that high fees and full blocks and easy double spins are a good thing for Bitcoin. That's kryptonite to Bitcoin.
So just to remind everyone, the reason for Bitcoin decentralization is so that not too much of the miners are in one area or one country. Ideally, we want them spread out all over the world so that the network is more difficult to shut down. So you're saying that Bitcoin Unlimited understands this, and you're going to try to protect the Chinese miners, even if the block size goes up. And maybe try to get some miners somewhere else. I know a lot of the Bitcoin mining is centralized in China. They have inexpensive electricity. They build a lot of electronics right there. I saw a speech by Vitalik Buterin years ago where he said the cost of sending a miner like across the world and you're turning it off, putting it in a box, it destroys the value of the miner. It's much better to take them to the factory next door and plug them in. Is Bitcoin mining too centralized in China? Is this another problem that Bitcoin may face?
I think Bitcoin mining is more decentralized than ever before. People love to complain that that Bitmain has a large share of the marketplace there. But if you think about it, in the early days of Bitcoin, Intel and AMD had a duopoly on mining equipment hardware, right? And then now we have Bitmain, we have Bitfury, we have eBit, we have Avalon, and there's several more that we see a whole bunch of them at this point. There's a bunch more, and they're spread out across the world at this point. So, and now we have more Bitcoin mining pools than ever before. There's a couple dozen Bitcoin mining pools. So I don't share the same concerns about mining centralization. And you're in the U.S. there. It's like saying, oh, Bitcoin mining is in the U.S. or Bitcoin R&D is in the U.S. The U.S. is a great big giant country with a couple 100 million people. So what, right? Bitcoin mining's in China. China's a great big giant country with 1 billion people, and those billion people have different wants and needs and desires and different ways of thinking. So what if a bunch of them are in China? There are a whole bunch of them are on planet Earth, right? Bitcoin mining is centralized on planet Earth. So what?
It does. It is. It's unsafe. We're putting all our eggs in one basket. We need those Garzik satellites. I love that idea. It got shut down too fast. But I know, and it's very jingoistic of us to say that the Chinese government is unfit, while our own government is very questionable these days. Any government. The most
recent WikiLeaks and the CIA spying on everybody, right? If we should be afraid of any government on Earth, it's the United States government. The United States government is the biggest threat to human freedom the world has ever seen. The Chinese government's no angel. But the U.S. government's way worse, right? The U.S. government's waging how many wars around the world, dropping bombs on people all over the world? The Chinese government, they killed some students in 1989, and they, oppressed some people in Tibet and do plenty of bad things themselves. But in recent history, I don't think the Chinese government has killed anywhere near as many as the United States government has. Previously, the Chinese government's killed, millions. They're murderers too. But that's why I'm not a fan of any government. But I don't think we have any more reason to be afraid of the Chinese government today than we do of the U.S. government.
So it's not just a problem of governments and authority figures, but we did talk about earlier about technical issues, and I'd like to get back into that with segregated witness. Now, this is a Bitcoin Core / Blockstream solution. My basic understanding is that it takes the signatures and stores them separately. By storing the signatures separately, there's now 1.5 meg of free space, almost the 2 megs initially offered by BU. This solution's been in the works for many years. It's been tested for about a year. What's the problem with this solution? Why is it not acceptable?
The things that segregated witness solves, the issues that it addresses, aren't things that need to be fixed urgently. Bitcoin Unlimited fixes the things that need to be fixed right away. And so an example I've been giving recently that I think is a good one, let's say you've been wandering the desert for the last several days and you're dying of thirst and you need your beard trimmed. When you finally get back to civilization, you should have some water and something to eat. And then later on, you can go to the barber shop and get your beard trimmed or trim your beard, right? Bitcoin Unlimited is the water for the Bitcoin network because it's dying of thirst, right? The fees are so high, the blocks are full, the user experience is horrible now because of that. Segregated witness is like trimming your beard or getting a haircut, right? Like, that's a good thing to do, but there's no urgency for that whatsoever. And maybe there's better ways to fix the problems that segregated witness is aiming to fix, or the improvements that segregated witness aims to improve. I think that there's plenty of room and time for more debate on those subjects, whereas the problems that Bitcoin Unlimited solves today, they're an emergency for Bitcoin, and they need to be solved right now. And Bitcoin Unlimited is a fantastic way to do that. And otherwise, we're going to see more and more Bitcoin's market cap bleeding out into altcoins and things other than Bitcoin, which is sad for all of us people that are involved in Bitcoin.
What about the idea of a hard fork versus a soft fork? I'm told that a SegWit would be a soft fork, so the previous coins would still be compatible, whereas Bitcoin Unlimited would be a hard fork where we would have 2 chains and then 2 sets of coins. Isn't it better to stick with the soft fork idea? Is there a way to maybe soft fork to Bitcoin Unlimited? Would that be possible?
Maybe, possibly. And it would be, there's still a lot more arguing about how to do that, but Ethereum has had lots of hard forks. The only time it resulted in 2 chains was when it was hard forked for a bailout, for economic reasons, to bail out a bunch of people that made poor investments. Monero's had lots of hard forks. Lots and lots of other altcoins have had hard forks. If you're hard forking for a good reason, it's not contentious. If you're hard forking to bail out a bunch of people who made a bad investment, it's contentious, and it winds up having a split chain like we did with like we saw with Ethereum, and it only happened that one time with Ethereum. I think we're much less likely to have 2 chains with Bitcoin for a couple of reasons. One, we're not hard forking to bail anybody out, and 2, the difficulty of Bitcoin adjusts every 2016 blocks, whereas with Ethereum it adjusts after every single block. So if Bitcoin were to hard fork in favor of Bitcoin Unlimited, you have thousands of blocks that still need to be mined before the difficulty readjusts. And even if you have a 50-50 split in the network hash rate, which we're not, I think we're going to split. If there's a hard fork in favor of Bitcoin Unlimited, I think it'll be something with like 90+% of the hash rate, right? When it gets to 70 or 80%, I think the other remaining 20 or 30% will hop right on over, because nobody wants to be mining something that's worthless. But let's say it's somehow split at 50-50. You have the Bitcoin Core 1 megabyte chain that instead of the blocks now being every 10 minutes, the blocks will be every 20 minutes. So the transactional throughput capacity will be half of what it is right now today, and it's already completely full. So that means the confirmation times will be much longer, and the fees will be even higher on that chain. Whereas on the Bitcoin Unlimited chain, even though the blocks will be every 20 minutes, if the blocks are 2 megabytes, it still has the same throughput capacity we have today. If the blocks are 4 megabytes, it has double the throughput capacity today. So you'll have 2 versions of Bitcoin, one in which the confirmation times are very long and delayed, and the fees are very high, and you're not sure when your transaction is going to get included in a block. And then you have the Bitcoin Unlimited version, in which your transactions are always included in the very next block, and the fees are very low, and the risk of double spend is very low. And for anybody who's trying to use Bitcoin in commerce, it's very clear which one of those 2 versions of Bitcoin is more useful for anybody that's using Bitcoin in commerce. And the people that want to use Bitcoin as a store of value will want to store their Bitcoin in the chain that's actually being used as commerce, because when you want to move your savings out of the store of value and use it, you need to have it on a chain that's useful. And so there's almost no doubt in my mind whatsoever. I think pretty much everybody's going to wind up on one chain, and that's the Bitcoin Unlimited chain. And I don't think the other chain's likely to continue at all. I don't think it should be attacked. I think it's just going to die on its own accord, because nobody's going to use it. Who wants to use a version of Bitcoin that's super expensive and super slow and almost impossible to get your transactions confirmed in a block? Nobody's going to want to use that all by itself, just on its own accord.
And just to assuage everyone's fears, if you're holding your Bitcoin and you hold the private keys, you'll get coins on both of these chains. Coinbase recently announced in a very strange way that they're not going to honor that. I'm not sure what the other exchanges are doing, but if you hold the coins yourself in a paper wallet, in a Bitcoin wallet on your phone or on your computer, maybe a Trezor or a Ledger, when you bring those coins back on the network, you'll get. So the safest thing anyone could do is just pretty much hold both. And then no matter what happens, it goes up, it goes down, you've got coins on both chains, right?
And if you have an opinion like I do on this as to which version of Bitcoin is the better one, let's say it does find out that there's 2 chains, I'll tell you, I will sell my coins on the slow, expensive core chain and use the proceeds from that if I'm even able to get my coins in a confirmation in a block to get it to an exchange. But that'll probably be really difficult, because the network fees will be so high and there'll be so little hash rate on that chain. But if that were even possible to do, I would sell those coins and use the proceed to buy more of the useful Bitcoins, because Bitcoin Unlimited coins will be so much more useful, because you'll actually be able to send and receive them with people, unlike the Bitcoin Core coins on this congested network that'll cost a fortune and take forever to move the Bitcoins. So
now just to play devil's advocate, does Bitcoin Unlimited have the same difficulty adjustment issue? Because we're now seeing another problem. If you fork and then the difficulty is way too high, like you say, it's going to take 2 weeks for that difficulty to be adjusted. If that happened to Bitcoin Unlimited and there was like a Bitcoin Unlimited 2, would you be protected against the fork, or would the same difficulty problem hamstring Bitcoin Unlimited?
Well, both chains would have the same difficulty. Unless Bitcoin Core completely goes against what they've been saying for the last several years, which is no hard fork. The only way Bitcoin Core could not have that is if they were to hard fork again. So they'd have they'd have the first hard fork in favor of Bitcoin Unlimited, and they'd have to hard fork again to lower the difficulty or change the proof of work or whatever they'd want to do, which would be in complete contradiction with everything that they've set up to this point. So I don't think they'd do that, but who knows? Maybe they would. But Bitcoin Unlimited is not affected by this problem at all anyhow, because even if they only have half the hash rate and the blocks are every 20 minutes instead of every 10 minutes, if the blocks are 2 megabytes, it still has the same throughput it has today. If it has 4 megabyte blocks every 20 minutes, it has double the throughput it has today. So it doesn't affect Bitcoin Unlimited in the same way the 1 megabyte limited core coin would be affected. It would be disastrous for the 1 megabyte limited core coin to suddenly have the blocks spaced out to being every 20 minutes. Whereas for Bitcoin Unlimited, it doesn't really hurt the users at all, because they're still going to be included in the next block because the block can be bigger.
And if they forked again, then we'd have 3 Bitcoins. So we're doing really well now. We're getting a lot of Bitcoins.
I think it's clear which one of those 3 is the useful one, and I think everybody will converge very, very, very quickly on the useful one, which is the Bitcoin Unlimited version. And to be honest, I don't think those other chains are even going to exist really at all, because nobody wants to use money if you can't spend it and if it's not useful, or if it costs you a fortune to spend it and you have another option that's cheaper and faster and easier to spend. It's not even an option. People will choose the fast, easy, safe version of Bitcoin Unlimited rather than the slow and expensive and unsafe version of Bitcoin Core.
Now, I've also been told that SegWit is a fix for transaction malleability, which is one of the things that Mark Karpelès claims brought down Mt. Gox, that they were sending out transactions and they couldn't confirm that the transaction was sent, so their computer just kept sending out transactions, draining their accounts. Does Bitcoin Unlimited have any protections for this transaction malleability, or is it being developed still?
So Bitcoin has had this problem of transaction malleability for its entire existence from day one. Mark was lying when he said that was the cause of his problem. Transaction malleability can cause some issues for developers, but you have to design your systems in a way so that you don't lose 800,000 Bitcoins because of it. But that's a whole other story. So Bitcoin Unlimited does have a plan to fix the transaction malleability issue, but that's not urgent. It hasn't been fixed for the last 8 years. If it takes another 8 months to get that fixed, that's fine. It's not a problem. What we need to fix right now today are the high fees and slow confirmation times of Bitcoin and the ease of double spends on Bitcoin. That's a big, big, big problem for Bitcoin that needs to be solved urgently. Fixing transaction malleability is a good thing to fix, but not urgent in any way whatsoever.
So we just had a halving in Bitcoin where the block reward went from 25 Bitcoins a block to 12.5 Bitcoins a block. The question I'm asked next is, how do Bitcoin miners make their money? Is it mainly the block reward? Are they hurting because of the halving?
They're doing fantastic. I think at the time of the halving, the Bitcoin price was like, I don't know, 400 and something dollars. Now Bitcoin's more than double that. So even though the number of Bitcoins they receive per block has dropped in half, the value in terms of dollars or RMB or euros is much more than double. So the miners are making more money than ever before per block of Bitcoin. And if you look back in the early days, I remember when the Bitcoin blocks were 50 Bitcoins per block, but the price of Bitcoin was $5. So they were making $250 per block, right? So there was $250 per block worth of computing power to secure the Bitcoin network. Today, we have around $15,000 worth of computing power per block to secure the Bitcoin network. The Bitcoin network is more secure than ever before. So if the Bitcoin price continues to double every 4 years, the Bitcoin network is going to get more and more and more secure as time goes by, even though the number of Bitcoins being released onto the network is dropping by half every 4 years.
I know at some point the Bitcoin block reward will be mined out and there'll be no more block rewards. So there's also fees for the miners. How important are the fees to the miners? Do they make a lot of money from there? I know the fees are high lately. Are they making a lot more money?
Yeah, they're making a lot more money from that right now, but it's hurting the overall value of Bitcoin. So right now, one block is 12.5 Bitcoins. Let's call it, about $1,000 of Bitcoins. So they're making $12,500 per block. They're making about another $2,000 in fees per block as well. So almost $15,000 total they're receiving per block. So $2,000 of it is in fees, $12,500 of it is in the block reward. So I hear some of these core people saying, oh, the miners are loving that. They want to cause this stalemate, not having that. No, that's the exact opposite. The miners want to solve this, because as soon as this problem is solved and more people can use Bitcoin and there's more people using Bitcoin around the world, the value of Bitcoin goes up from $1,000 a Bitcoin to $2,000, $4,000, $10,000 a Bitcoin. So if Bitcoins are $10,000 each, even if we need 10 megabyte blocks to do it, suddenly the Bitcoin block reward went from $12,500 per block to $125,000 per block. So if you're a miner and you have a choice of getting an extra $2,000 in fees now with a $12,500 block, or maybe $200 in fees and $125,000 block, I don't know about you, But I think just about everybody else in the world would rather have $125,000 than $12,000 per block. It's not even an issue. And the miners, I think, see and understand that, and that's why we're seeing them move en masse to supporting Bitcoin Unlimited. So.
Now, the elephant in the room here that we haven't talked about yet is the Lightning Network. The idea that I've heard is if they fix transaction malleability, they could kind of peg another network to Bitcoin, have this Lightning thing. We could send little transactions around, Alice to Bob to Dave. Bob gets a quarter for holding the transaction, but he can't cash it. He only gets a quarter if it's delivered. It's a complicated, like, telephone kind of system to give it a basic understanding. But what it would do is there would be a layer on top of Bitcoin, and that would be the layer you'd use to buy your coffees and things. And then Bitcoin would be a slower settlement layer. Are the miners afraid of this? Does this cut them out of the process? Would they not make money in this Lightning SegWit world?
I don't think that they're opposed to it really at all, because the more people that are using Bitcoin as the base, the more valuable Bitcoin is. And the miners, the majority of their income is from the block reward, not from the fees on the network. And that'll continue to be the case for about the next 100 years. And it's worth pointing out that the Bitcoin Unlimited guys, they're not opposed to layer 2 technologies at all. We're excited about layer 2 technologies. They enable a lot of really great, interesting things. But our point is, don't strangle Bitcoin's layer 1 that brought us from nothing to where we are today, in order to try and build these systems that hopefully Lightning Network will work. Hopefully it'll be really useful, but it doesn't have an 8-year history of being tried and tested and true and working really well, whereas Bitcoin does. It has an 8-year track record of working amazingly well and growing from nobody using it to millions of users around the world. And that history of Bitcoin and the means in which Bitcoin grew from nothing to where it is today is actively being attacked and undermined and damaged by Bitcoin Core's roadmap of intentionally creating full blocks and high fees. That's damaging the Bitcoin that we all know and love that brought us to where we are today. And so the Bitcoin Unlimited guys are saying, don't damage Bitcoin. Don't limit Bitcoin. Let's keep going on the same path that we've been growing on the last 8 years. And in addition to that, let's build this cool layer 2 stuff. Let's fix transaction malleability. Let's fix all these other issues. But don't damage the Bitcoin that we all know and love that brought us to where we are today. Whereas a lot of the core developers today are actively saying that they want to damage the Bitcoin that brought us to where we are today by causing these full blocks and high fees. And that's terrifying for anybody who's holding Bitcoin and wants to see Bitcoin used as a currency by people around the world.
So in addition to the Lightning Network, I've also heard about what Blockstream Core is working on, which has been traditionally called side chains, and that somehow they'll link other chains to Bitcoin, use Bitcoin's processing power for other purposes. A lot of people are worried about this. They think it might be a conspiracy by a private company to own a part of Bitcoin. How much of this side chains conspiracy is mixed up in this whole debate?
I don't know much about the conspiracy. I think side chains are great, but don't break layer 1. Don't break the Bitcoin we all know and love. And the Bitcoin we all know and love is being broken right before our eyes by these high fees and full blocks. And the part that's so frustrating is that many people that are part of Bitcoin Core are openly and intentionally advocating for high fees and full blocks. That's kryptonite to Bitcoin, and that's why I'm so passionate about this issue. I want to see Bitcoin survive and thrive and be adopted by people all over the world. And if people are advocating for something that's damaging to that, I'm going to speak out against it, and that's why I'm glad to be here with you talking about it today.
Excellent stuff. Now, what about the Blockstream company? I've heard it's funded by banks or insurance companies. Are they attempting to take control of Bitcoin, or are they just misunderstood computer geeks that maybe aren't great at communicating? Is it a communications problem, or are they malicious, you think?
They're definitely not good at communicating. And I'm happy to help communicate. And that was probably there were 2 things that I think I really did for Bitcoin. One, I invested a bunch of money in a bunch of the startups, but I was one of the first communicators for Bitcoin to try and explain Bitcoin to people that didn't know anything about Bitcoin. And then later Andreas came and did an even more amazing job than I could possibly hope to do on the communications front. But a lot of these core guys are not good communicators at all, and they definitely need some help with that. But in addition to that, a lot of them don't understand the characteristics that made Bitcoin useful as money. If you damage the characteristics of Bitcoin that made it useful as money, and those are the reasons that when I saw Bitcoin, I realized that Bitcoin is going to start being used as money, is because it had the best characteristics of money that the world has ever seen. If you damage those characteristics, which are what many members of the core team are intentionally trying to do, because not because they're paid off by the banks and insurance companies. It's because they don't understand what makes money money. They're intentionally trying to damage those characteristics because they don't understand, and that's going to be a big, big problem for Bitcoin. And that's why I'm speaking out as loudly as I possibly can against these things, because I love Bitcoin to the very core of my being. I don't want to see it damaged. I want to see Bitcoin succeed. So when people, even though they're doing it unintentionally, when they're damaging these characteristics of Bitcoin, I'm going to speak out as loudly and as often as I possibly can against those things that are hurting Bitcoin. So I don't think, the short answer is I don't think it's a conspiracy.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I'm glad to hear that you love Bitcoin, because I love Bitcoin too. And a lot of people are worried about this situation. I wanted to make sure it's not just a communication problem or maybe some big ego problems. If we could just, I worry about the hard fork, the splintering of the community. I want to try to get everyone back together on one page. I worry that these scaling conferences have somehow failed. We couldn't get the techs, the miners, the users together.
So I think those,
are we failing at this?
If I can add to the scaling conferences that were put on by Scaling Bitcoin, those were incredibly lopsided in one way. And you were the only people that were allowed to present at the second two were people that were in favor of Core's roadmap. And at the Scaling Hong Kong conference, they kept this segregated witness plan for everybody who attended. And then it wasn't a conference for people to talk and decide about what the right scaling roadmap was. It was a conference where they said, here's segregated witness, here's what we're going to do, you're going to take it and you're going to like it. And why did I need to fly to Hong Kong to be told? Like, I thought we were there to discuss what the roadmap was going to be, not to be told what the roadmap was going to be. So I was really, really disappointed, and I'm not going to be attending any more conferences put on by that same group in the future. And all of the Bitcoin Unlimited people that applied for speaking slots to talk about, like, the extreme thin blocks technology, for example, that allows blocks to propagate across the Great Firewall of China faster than blocks could previously propagate from one node to another, not crossing the Great Firewall of China. All of those talks were denied. They weren't even allowed to present on those at those conferences. So I'm done with the Scaling Bitcoin's series of conferences put on by that particular group.
Now, also during the first conference, they kind of said they got all the miners, everyone in one room. They kind of agreed to SegWit, but they also agreed to a 2 megabyte block increase. Is that part of the problem? I even think that the 2 megabyte was supposed to come first, then the SegWit. Is it because we drifted away from that we're having this big split?
I think there's a big part of that is the miners and a lot of the Bitcoin public feel really betrayed by that Hong Kong agreement. And there were a whole bunch of semantics and word games played by that. At first, we thought, Blockstream, the company, signed it, and then they said, oh no, we signed that as individuals. And then Luke Jr. eventually coded up some 2 megabyte hard fork where instead of going to 2 megabytes, it dropped the 1 megabyte limit today down to 300 kilobytes. Then over the next, I forget how many years, it was like 16 years or something like that, eventually it gets to 2 megabytes. So maybe technically that followed the actual letter of the law of the agreement, but for any sane person, it sure didn't follow the spirit of that agreement. So I think a lot of people are feeling really upset and betrayed by that. And at this point, we knew that this was a problem that was coming down the line for years, that the Bitcoin network was going to be congested. The Bitcoin core team blocked every attempt to solve that issue before it became a problem, and have actively advocated for things that are creating that problem. So for me, I think it's time to switch to Bitcoin Unlimited, a dev team that understands that why Bitcoin is useful as money, why Bitcoin is being used by people all over the world, and what brought it to that point, and they're actively trying to improve those characteristics rather than undermine them.
And I do remember it was Gavin Andreessen who even brought up this whole scaling debate. And then we had the Bitcoin XT and the Bitcoin Classic. We had a lot of discussion about this, but the same thing, we just couldn't really get together. There's too many parties, or there's some kind of confusion that we couldn't figure it out. Let's see, moving on to the next question. Yeah, so the previous attempts like Bitcoin Classic, they said, and this was just in discussions, but they said that they could theoretically vote on anything, including the 21 million Bitcoin limit. Now, you talked about economic incentives, and I agree with you. Bitcoin is the best money, and one of the best things I like is the hard limit of 21 million Bitcoins. In Bitcoin Unlimited, can anything be voted on it, or is it just this block size issue that you're focused on?
Just the block size issue. But for Bitcoin in general, if everybody in the world using Bitcoin decided that 21 million Bitcoins isn't a good limit, they should make 21 million Bitcoins per block. They could do something like that, but I don't even think it would still be Bitcoin at that point, and I sure don't think anybody's going to agree to that at all. So just like if everybody agreed to start calling Bitcoins Mooncoins, then the new name would be Mooncoins, but that doesn't change anything. So Bitcoin Unlimited for the short term is just about allowing everybody who's running a node to be able to configure what the maximum block size they're willing to accept is.
Yeah, I would definitely be against raising that limit. And one of my concerns with things like Dogecoin that had billions and billions of units and things like Ethereum, and they could just print more, is that it's difficult to understand the value of the coin from an economic perspective. Whereas Bitcoin, I've got 1 to 21 million and I'm feeling good about it. So
Right. Bitcoin is valuable because it's useful and it's scarce. And I think everybody on both the core and the Bitcoin Unlimited side agree that Bitcoin should be scarce, because as soon as you get rid of Bitcoin scarcity, its value goes away. The part that has me and where the disagreement is on the usefulness of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin core camp seem to think that Bitcoin will only be used as a store of value, and so they're undermining its usefulness in commerce. And the Bitcoin Unlimited team want to improve Bitcoin's usefulness in commerce. And so that's where I think the disagreement comes. But I think people on both sides of the debate agree that Bitcoin needs to remain scarce with a 21 million limit.
So I also have some questions about just BU in specific. I've heard that Bitcoin Unlimited has a president and a governing structure. Is this something that you support?
So Bitcoin Unlimited isn't Bitcoin any more than Bitcoin Core is limited. So Blockstream, the company, has a president, they have a CTO. Bitcoin Unlimited has a governing body to govern what the roadmap is for Bitcoin Unlimited. But just like we're seeing now with people switching away from Core and moving to Bitcoin Unlimited, if people don't like Bitcoin Unlimited's roadmap, they can switch away from Bitcoin Unlimited to something else. So I don't see it as a problem at all.
And there's one other thing. Okay, so Satoshi's out of Bitcoin. We don't really have a Satoshi. I know that Linux, the Linux kernel, has Linus. Linus is kind of a final decision and arbiter of what goes in and out of the kernel. He's famously very conservative, and that's kept the kernel safe for a long, long time. Does Bitcoin need a Satoshi? Do we need a leader type thing?
I don't know, but we don't have one. So we have to deal with the reality that we're at. We don't have one of those. So I think the best thing we can do right now is have as much free and open discussion about these issues so that people can decide and the community can decide what the right path for Bitcoin going forward is. And the worst thing we can do is disallow free and open discussion of this, which has been one of the things that's been most disappointing to me, is the amount of censorship that's going on platforms that I used to love and participate in all the time. And suddenly now people that have an opinion that's not in alignment with one particular group aren't even allowed to express their opinions. That's been really, really, really disappointing for me to see that happening in the Bitcoin community.
So part of the censorship issue, from my understanding, is that Thamos, the moderator of our Bitcoin, has a very strict no altcoin rule. And this mainly comes from everybody getting jazzed up about their altcoin and coming in to promote it, and they get kind of spammy. And it's been kind of an annoyance in the past. Certainly the Dogecoin phenomenon was a very big thing. Everybody, what me coin, that kind of thing.
So if I can interject a little bit there. This is the
problem you ran into with Bitcoin Unlimited, right? You were declared an altcoin. Is that the basic censorship issue?
So it would be one thing if the rule was just you're not allowed to discuss altcoins, but that's not the case at all. You can discuss Bitcoin Unlimited all day long, all you want on on our Bitcoin, as long as you're saying negative things about Bitcoin Unlimited. If you say anything positive about Bitcoin Unlimited, your post will be deleted. And we saw like an absolutely just maddening example about a week ago when an exploit was discovered in Bitcoin Unlimited. Somebody was nice enough to report that to Bitcoin Unlimited. The Bitcoin Unlimited devs submitted a patch to their GitHub for that, and we're preparing to release the updated version of Bitcoin Unlimited to everybody. Some core supporters out there noticed the patch that was submitted on GitHub. And then Peter Todd and others tweeted about it and posted it on Reddit. And instantly, there was an attack on a bunch of Bitcoin Unlimited nodes across the network there. The patch was already written. It was already available for download. It was out there for anybody who wanted it so that their Bitcoin Unlimited node couldn't be crashed by this particular exploit. People submitted links to that patch to our Bitcoin, the most popular Bitcoin discussion platform on the entire internet. The links to the patch so that people could find out about the patch and be downloaded were deleted. People weren't even allowed to find out about the updated software version. Whereas all sorts of discussion about how Bitcoin Unlimited has had a bug, nodes are crashing, anything you want negative about Bitcoin Unlimited was perfectly fine and allowed to stay on our Bitcoin. But the links to solve the problem that Bitcoin Unlimited node runners were having, those links were deleted. And to me, that's not moderation. That's not saying no altcoin discussion. That's censorship, and that's borderline an attack when you're censoring the solution to a problem that people are having in the Bitcoin ecosystem. That's just maddening for me, and I think anybody that's involved in Bitcoin should condemn that sort of activity.
I agree, and I think that's too far. I had heard that it was mainly the altcoin issue. I also think at a certain point, they might have to reevaluate that rule. We've been having a pretty serious scaling debate for the last 3 to 6 months, and it kind of seems like that rule for Bitcoin Unlimited is an old and outdated rule that needs to be adjusted so that we can properly discuss this. If it forks, if they split, are they just going to have the discussion start? For example, if Bitcoin Unlimited wins, if it's the winning chain, is our Bitcoin just going to someday flip a switch and suddenly allow this discussion? Is that something you see happening, or is it's always going to be censored?
I hope they flip a switch to allow free and open discussion, regardless of what client it is. Another thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is, like I just found this out recently. So I was, sitting across the table from me here is the CTO at Bitcoin.com. He told me the other day that pretty much all of the nodes that we use for our mining pool on Bitcoin.com, they are all Bitcoin Unlimited nodes. They are all identifying themselves to the rest of the Bitcoin network as Bitcoin Core nodes. Otherwise, people will attack them and DDoS them and try and bump them off the network. So there's a whole bunch more Bitcoin Unlimited nodes out there on the network that are identifying themselves as core nodes, specifically so people don't attack them.
And I know you've also
other
had
people's stuff isn't cool. Don't do that.
well, certainly, you've also had DOS attacks on Bitcoin.com, right, where you're getting out information about both sides. Both just Bitcoin.com has normal Bitcoin articles about things happening, and it has updates on the scaling debate. So they're trying to knock out both of those things.
Yeah, which is not what Bitcoin's all about. Bitcoin's supposed to be about, free and open financial transactions with anyone in the world and free and open discussion about those transactions. So
I don't know. You sounded pretty reasonable now. I expected more of a bomb-throwing anarchist here. One more thing. Let's see. I thought of this the other day. Okay, so part of the Bitcoin Unlimited fork is that you're taking the transaction history with you. Is this the next new trend in altcoins? Are they going to say, for a fair distribution, which I suppose in your case it's incredibly fair, we're going to use the old transaction chain and just start a new altcoin and say, hey, if you own Bitcoin, you now own this altcoin? Are we going to see an explosion of those after the BU fork?
I'm not aware of any other altcoins that have done that previously, or I think there was one.
I don't know of one that
did that, but
I mean, Namecoin's kind of merged mine. Dogecoin merged mines with Litecoin. I don't know that they've used the UTXO set in this way, but it may be a new thing where you say, hey, I want the best tech adopters. I want the Bitcoin people. So I'm just going to give them however much they have of my coin.
So as someone who tried really, really, really hard for years to give away Bitcoins, I know how hard it is to get people to accept something when it's still new and they don't know what it is. So I can't count how many people I gave Bitcoins to who didn't claim them or didn't want them or lost them or didn't pay any attention. And so even with a bunch of altcoins, even if they're basing on the UTXO set of Bitcoin, 99% of the Bitcoiners aren't going to bother to claim them or pay any attention because they're still too busy using Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's already much more useful than these other things. So overcoming Bitcoin's network effect is really, really difficult to do. But if the fees get too high and the confirmation times get too long and the double spins get too easy, watch out. And that's what I'm scared of for Bitcoin.
It is true. People, even if you give them the Bitcoin just for free, they have a hard time holding on to it. I was talking to my friend Sarah this morning. She gave Bitcoin to her friend, and of course they saw the price go up recently. They wanted to, maybe sell a little, and they had to ask her for the passwords. Unfortunately, she was a good friend that saved the passwords, but also she was kind of covering their butts, kind of making sure they're not like children. So, but Bitcoin, I've always said, it's very much a currency for adults. You hold it yourself. If you lose it, it's gone. So.
That's right.
All right. So what are the core people going to tell me when I go to Blockstream and I ask to interview them and they come on? What are they going to tell me that's wrong with this project? Do we fully understand their side as well?
I think my understanding of their side is that they think, I guess they have two. One concern they have is they think that the Bitcoin network is going to become centralized. And if it takes a much more expensive computer to run a full node, right now we can run it on a Raspberry Pi for 25 bucks. If it takes a more expensive computer than that, they're worried that there will be fewer full nodes around the world, and that will make Bitcoin more susceptible to censorship and control and undermining by governments. I'm of the opinion that if we have bigger blocks, meaning more people can use Bitcoin around the world, we'll have, instead of having 10 or 20 million people around the world using Bitcoin, we have hundreds of millions or even a couple billion people using Bitcoin around the world. Even if it takes a much more expensive computer around the world, there's likely to be more full nodes around the world. because we have so many more people using Bitcoin. And we also have the political protection. Right now, if governments say Bitcoin's only used for people buying drugs on the dark net, and it's only for bad people, and only bad people use Bitcoin, because there's only 10 or 20 million of us using Bitcoin, that's a relatively small voice of people that can say, no, Bitcoin's good, Bitcoin's used for good things, Bitcoin's wonderful on purse.io or whatever else. If we can get Bitcoin being used by hundreds of millions of people or billions of people, if governments try and demonize Bitcoin, we'll have billions or at least hundreds of millions of people's voices who could say, no, I love Bitcoin, I use Bitcoin all the time, Bitcoin's not for bad people. So a really good way to insulate ourselves from additional attack or regulations or government pressure is to get as many people using Bitcoin as quickly as we possibly can. And the rate of Bitcoin adoption has slowed down dramatically since the blocks became full, the fees became high, and basically the user experience of people trying to do Bitcoin transactions started to suck. As soon as that user experience declined, the adoption rate of Bitcoin has declined as well. And that's really scary for someone who, I'm not a bomb-throwing anarchist, but I am an anarchist. I want to see Bitcoin undermine every single government on the entire planet's ability to control the money supply. That's why I got involved with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's ability to do that is being damaged by full blocks and high fees and slow confirmation times, which are creating a bad user experience. And a bad user experience drives people away from Bitcoin and prevents new users from joining Bitcoin.
Now, I read an article recently on Medium, and the guy talked about open source projects and previous forks and the name and would a rose by any other name smell as sweet. And what he said is that in all the past Linux forks, they always took on a new name and they competed with the project with a new name. And I know you said that Bitcoin has a drug element to it and has a crash and a disappearance. Would it be better to just take a new name for Bitcoin Unlimited and just compete with the core with, I don't know, just a random coin name, random coin?
I don't think so. Bitcoin Unlimited will have Bitcoin.com that already has much more traffic in the United States than Bitcoin.org does, and certainly more than BitcoinCore.org or Blockstream.com or any of the other ones. And it's going to have the majority of users. It's going to have the majority of wallets. It's going to have the majority of everything. So no, I don't think there's any reason to change the name from anything other than Bitcoin.
All right, and I think I'm running out of questions here. I had one more conspiracy issue people told me. They're also
not a lizard.
I know, but they all want to know that. The chat is scrolling by. But they say that another coin is trying to adopt SegWit, that Litecoin's trying to adopt it. And maybe if Litecoin adopted it, we would see what's happening. Is there any truth? Are you trying to block SegWit adoption on Lightning 2 or on Litecoin 2? Do you have anything to do with that? It's absurd, but I have to ask this.
Sure, you're welcome to ask. So I have never owned a single Litecoin ever in my entire life. I have absolutely nothing to do with Litecoin. If Litecoin users want to adopt SegWit, more power to them. I have no problem with it whatsoever. If they don't want to adopt it, that's just fine too. Like I said, I've never owned a single Litecoin ever. I've never had a Litecoin wallet. I love Charlie Lee. Charlie Lee's a great guy, but he was mining Bitcoins in my office in Santa Clara back in like 2011 and 2012 after his wife got mad and kicked out all of his GPU miners from his house. He moved into my warehouse. So I've known Charlie for a long time. I don't have anything bad to say about Litecoin. It's just not something that's interesting me at this point. So if they want to adopt Litecoin, go ahead. If they don't, if they want to adopt SegWit, go ahead. If they don't want to, then don't. But don't blame me for any of that. I have absolutely nothing to do with any of that in any way. You can blame the blocking of SegWit in Litecoin on the lizard people. It has nothing to do with me. So.
All right, very good. And then one of the exchanges plans to adopt a BU as an altcoin, maybe with the ticker BTU. Is that acceptable to you? Is that more siding with core? Or do you think that'll just be worked out as the time goes on?
The exchanges can adopt and do whatever they want, but I think pretty clearly that Bitcoin Unlimited is going to have 99% of the users and 99% of the hash rate and 99% of everything, which I think means they'll also have 99% of the exchanges calling it Bitcoin as well.
All right. Well, you answered all my questions, and I think I'm out of things to say. But thank you so much for joining us, and I hope we've been able to get your side out there and show people that you do understand these issues and you've thought about it, and a lot of detail and a lot of work's gone into this. So hopefully people won't be so afraid of the fork. Remember, if it forks and you hold your own keys, not in Coinbase, no disrespect meant, but that's what your marketing did to me. If you hold your own keys in a wallet that's not Coinbase, you'll get coins on both sides of the fork, so you'll be okay no matter what happens. So that's a protection to everybody.
And holding your own keys in any cryptocurrency, whether it's Bitcoin or Litecoin or anything else, is always a good idea, regardless of whether or not you think a fork is coming. Always hold your own keys for your own coins yourself, no matter what.
Absolutely, and I think that's a great note to end on. So thanks so much, Roger, for joining us. And is there any thing you'd like to plug anywhere that people can check out more information about Bitcoin Unlimited?
Yeah, bitcoinunlimited.info is their website. I think it's been being DDoSed for the last couple of days, so it might be offline at the moment. Not cool. We should support free speech for everybody, even if it's people who disagree with. And of course, visit bitcoin.com. We have a team of quite a few people working on that day in and day out. There's a lot of cool stuff over there, so go visit bitcoin.com. You'll be amazed how much cool stuff we built, and we're building more and more cool stuff over there every day.
All right, great. Well, thanks so much for joining us. And to our 225 live viewers at home, if everyone would give us a thumbs up and a share, maybe push subscribe if you haven't already. And if you'd like to follow me on Twitter, I'm at @MadBitcoins on Twitter. Got some other fun videos on there. And also check out the World Crypto Network at worldcryptonetwork.com. We do other interviews and talks like this, and we're just really excited about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So thanks so much for everyone joining us. We're out of time. Bye-bye.